Dr. Roger Firestein has taught more people to lead in the creative process than anyone else in the world. He's been called the gold standard, and he creativity programs, or his presented programs, to over 600 organizations nationally and internationally. And he is the associate professor, senior faculty at the Center for Applied Imagination at SUNY Buffalo State, and the president of Innovation Resources, Inc. And he's written 6 books, and the latest of which is Create in a Flash, A Leader's Recipe for Breakthrough Innovation. Roger, how are you doing today?
Clayton, I'm doing great. I'm doing just great. It's great to be with you and great to talk about this stuff.
Absolutely. I'm glad to have you here, and it's an exciting topic, and I think it is a word that we use in common parlance quite a bit, but I don't know that it's a word that we think a whole lot about, a word that we stop to dig into the nooks and crannies of it. And so, as we discussed a little bit before the program, I found that this as something that I wanted to create content, videos, podcasts about. Creativity became the niche that really interested me, because it was the center, the thing that got me interested in all these other different areas. It's like, if you think about creativity in the arts, or creativity as an entrepreneur, or inventing, all of those different things, the central reason that I gravitate towards those different things was creativity. And so finding that is the thing that I wanted to begin to investigate and hopefully create a little bit of a brand around. But that was a big revelation for me. So for you, what was it that led you to this area? What got you interested in this area?
Well, here's a long story. So I grew up in Colorado. And you're in Missouri. I grew up in Colorado, not too far away from you. And as I was growing up, I learned to play. I played piano. My mom had me. I grew up on a farm in Colorado, and I played piano for years. I couldn't stand it after a while, right? And that was until I was about 14 years old. And a minister at our church gave me this little 4-string steel guitar that was held together with Scotch tape and half full of sand, because it had been at campfires and stuff. And he thought I might be interested in playing it. Well, I picked up this guitar, and my parents didn't see me for the next 3 months because I was in my room in the basement practicing. And so I was fortunate enough to start teaching guitar, and I started my career at the University of Northern Colorado in Greeley, Colorado, and I thought I was going to be a music major, a guitar major. And I was also teaching students at the time, and I essentially put myself through college teaching guitar. And one of the things that I found, I was finishing, I think, between my freshman and sophomore year, is that my students were getting bored with their early songs. And somehow I thought if I could get them to get more creative, they'd enjoy their music more. So I started reading about creativity, and one place and 2 names kept coming up consistently in the literature. And the 2 names were Dr. Sidney J. Parnes and Dr. Ruth Knoller. And this place that time was called the Interdisciplinary Center for Creativity Studies at Buffalo State College in Buffalo, New York. Well, in April of 1977, I got the courage to call the center, and I'm at my parents' house at that time. I'm downstairs, and I dial the phone on the wall. Okay, dial it, okay? And I get the secretary on the phone, and she said, and I explained to her my interest, and she said, well, Dr. Parnes is here. Would you like to talk to him? Now, Clayton, I'd never met an author in my life. I was 21 years old at the time, and all the authors that I met I thought were dead, all right? I thought you wrote a book and you died. Right? And so here I am. I'm going to meet this rock star, this fellow that I've read about, his books that I have, and all this stuff. So I had this conversation with him. He tells me about this Creative Problem Solving Institute that's a week-long conference in June. And then he tells me about this brand new master's degree in creativity studies, studying the science of creativity. And so I get off the phone, and I'm just shaking. I'm so excited. I run up the stairs, and I say to my mom, I said, Mom, I just talked to Sidney Parnes in Buffalo, New York. And you know what she said? She said, what? You made a long-distance phone call? Now, long-distance phone calls from rural Colorado in the 70s were pretty expensive. So in 1977, I came out here to Buffalo. I took a course. I then went back and finished up my degree, moved out here in 1978. I got to study with Dr. Parnes and Dr. Knoller, and both of which have passed by quite some time ago now. I think I was the 5th or the 7th person to get a Master of Science degree in Creativity Studies. We've now graduated close to 700 folks in the field, and so and I've been here teaching since 1984, and writing and that sort of stuff. So it was music that got me into this, and just the whole passion about creativity and how we create. And I've been doing it now for about 45 years, and I'm still working on it. I have a new book coming out in January about solving the real problem. We can talk about that too. But that's kind of the journey that got me here. Yeah.
Sure, for sure. And out of curiosity, just as a lover of the steel guitar, was it the guitar form? Was it lap steel or one of the what was?
No, it was a little tenor guitar. It was a little tenor guitar. Yeah, and it was baritone ukulele or a tenor guitar or something like that.
Oh, sure.
I eventually graduated up to the 6 strings. Yeah.
There you go.
So then I've been playing. I'm starting to play more again. So yeah.
No, that's awesome. That's awesome. Sure. And with your work as a creativity consultant, what is it to be a creativity consultant, and usually what is it that sparks people to reach out to you?
Well, the whole thing that we teach, and this is what you've seen also, you said that creativity is a niche for you. I would say that creativity is life. I mean, we don't exist without creativity. Our ability to solve problems, to create new ways, is what makes us human. But being a creativity consultant, and that's probably the best word we can use for it. It's hard to explain it, but I will do this. One of the things that we know about creativity is it follows a process, right? And this process is universal. So whether you're creating in art or in science or in music or in media or in business, it follows kind of 4 basic steps. First thing, figure out what the problem is. When you have a good definition of the problem, then generate some ideas for solving it, pick the best of those ideas, refine them, and put together an action plan. And that's it. And that works across the disciplines. And so when I'm brought in to work with a group, I've worked with a group they're kind of stymied, they've gotten stale, and so I'm able to provide some processes for helping people to define problems more effectively, for then helping people to generate ideas quickly and much more effectively, based on the science of the study of creativity that's been going on since before the 1950s. But that's kind of when we started in the 1950s, when we kind of really start the formal study of creativity occurred. So my job is to come in, and this is why I've been able to work across so many different industries, because the process is universal. And so perhaps one day I'll be working with a publishing company, and the next day I'm working with a utility company, and the next day I'm working with an orchestra. The process is the same. The process is the same.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one of the most interesting things is that isolating creativity, especially as a field academically to study, seems like such an innovation, such a creative act in itself. Can you tell me, is a lot of the history tied up there at Buffalo State as far as the history of the study of creativity?
Yeah, actually it began here in Buffalo with a gentleman named Alex Osborne. And Alex Osborne actually invented the brainstorming technique. Wrote a book called Applied Imagination, which became a classic. Alex Osborne is the O in the advertising agency BBDO, which is still one of the largest advertising agencies in the world. And what Osborne found was he had these young advertising executives, and they couldn't solve problems. They couldn't get creative. And so Osborne was studying creativity. He studied the early creators. He studied some of the early work on creativity. And then he began to put together this idea of deferring judgment. So when we're generating ideas, we don't judge them. We go for wild ideas, and we evaluate them later. So the idea is to separate the generation of the ideas from their evaluation. So Osborne developed this technique for generating ideas, and then in 1954, he founded an organization called the Creative Education Foundation. In 1955, my teacher, Sid Parnes, came on and began to be part of that as well. But a tool isn't enough. What we also needed was a process. And so Osborne's brilliance was not only in just creating this brainstorming tool, but realizing that, you can brainstorm for facts and data. You can brainstorm and come up with lots of different ways to state the problem, as well as generating ideas and then putting those ideas into action. And so in the 60s, the late 60s, they actually started the center at Buffalo State. And to get a program involved in that, at first, the folks were really not, you can't study creativity. That's just too goofy. It's woo. Now, this is back in the 60s, right? So what they had to do is they had to prove that it worked. And so what they did was they conducted a 4-semester course, an experimental group, and a control group. They taught them a variety of creativity methods and techniques in the creative process. They evaluated them all on all sorts of psychological instruments, including the ability to solve problems in their lives better. And they found that the groups that were trained in this stuff did significantly better on math, in English, and they were able to solve real-life problems a lot better than the non-trained groups. And so that was the impetus that began to create it as a formal discipline. So if you take a look at the formal discipline of creativity, it started here. And we have the archives, we have all the stuff that goes back to well before the 50s, the 40s, the work that Alex Osborne did. So if you want to study creativity, Buffalo State and now the Center for Creativity and Change, the Department of Creativity and Change Leadership, that's the place to go. And Clayton, you need to get your degree there. So, all right.
For sure. I will. I'm certainly, now that we're talking about it and musing about it, we'll see how that goes. But
there you go.
Yeah,
one class at a time. It's okay. You can take it distant. Yeah.
Sure, for sure. I'm interested in the name as well. You know, talking about the Center for Applied Imagination. How do we think about these categories of imagination, creativity? Do they occupy different roles, different umbrellas, or how would we think about those different categories?
It's a really good question. Let's take a look at imagination and creativity.
Yeah.
I would say that imagination is the part of creativity where we're coming up with the ideas. We're imagining what might be. But creativity needs to produce something that's novel or useful, all right? And it can be useful even only to the creator, the person that came up with it. But it has to be produced. Creativity there has to be some sort of a result. It doesn't have to be tangible. It can be a behavior change, but it has to manifest in the world in some way. And so I think a component of creativity is imagination. Imagination is imagining what might be, but I think creativity, and from what I've been able to experience, is that creativity is not only the imagining side, but also the judging side as well, the discerning side, the side where we select ideas, the side where we put ideas into action. And so there can be very creative ideas. It can also be very creative plans of action as well. So I would say creativity is probably the big umbrella, and then imagination sitting underneath that. Yeah.
Sure.
Great question. Thanks.
Yeah. All of that in mind, and I kind of tend to think, and as I mentioned, the using this as kind of the theme, the niche of my my work online. A lot of people, I think, don't think of creativity as something specific, something particular, something to kind of, I guess, dig into. They're not usually, they may use the word, but they're not necessarily thinking of it in terms of the specifics of the mechanisms and the techniques. And, that I think probably has to do with the degree to which, the field and, most broadly, is working its way, throughout society. But is that something that you find as far as people may use the word, but may not stop to think about the process as much within that word itself?
Oh, yeah. And when you tell people that there's a process for creativity, you get looks like, what? I mean, I thought people were just born with creativity. And one of the things that I encounter a lot is people say, well, you're in the creativity business. Well, I'm not creative. And it's like, here's the deal. Everybody's creative, okay? But what they're essentially saying when they're saying I'm not creative, I'm not an artist, or I'm not a musician, or, I'm not a sculptor or a dancer, because most people associate creativity with that kind of behavior or with that kind of outcome. Creative filmmakers, okay, like yourself, creative musicians. But, Abraham Maslow, the eminent psychologist who looked at healthy people, he said that a first-rate soup is better than a fourth-rate painting. A first-rate soup is better than a fourth-rate painting, right? And the idea is that you can be creative in any aspects of your life. I mean, going to the refrigerator and making a delicious meal out of leftovers, that's creative, Finding a new way to, feed the people in your community that need it, that's creative. Getting your 3-year-old to go to bed without crying, that's creative. Finding new ways to do that. finding a new way to tell them someone that you love them, that's creative. So it really is manifest in every aspect of of your life. There's no aspect of your life that doesn't have some creativity involved in it. So one of the things that I have to do is dispel the myth that yes, we are all creative and we create in different and valuable ways. One, and second, that you can become deliberately creative. You don't have to wait for those ideas to just hit you. There are mechanisms. There's a process that helps you to become deliberately creative, so you can turn on those ideas at will instead of waiting for creativity to happen. So that's kind of the approach that I take. And once people begin to realize that, once people begin to discover that, one, oftentimes what they think is the problem is not the problem, and finding the real problem is a very big part of creativity, not just ideas. When they find that they can do that better, when they find that they can generate ideas better and more quickly, lives change. Lives change, and that's what's extraordinary about this.
Absolutely, absolutely. So there are some of those myths, those misconceptions about who's creative and who's not. Are there any other misconceptions that you run into about creativity?
Yeah, that you have to be crazy to be creative. And this has gotten to be less over the years. But when I first started into this, people thought you had to be like, you had to be like. The example they use all the time is Vincent van Gogh cutting off his ear, Well, Van Gogh is a very creative guy, but he also had some other neuroses that are going on, right? But one of the things that we find is that highly functioning people are also highly creative people. It's just that the press has kind of gone toward the more sometimes unhealthy creative people, but we have unhealthy people that are not creative as well. So one, you don't have to be crazy to be creative, all right? I think that's the main thing. And then the other thing is that people finally need to realize that they are creative and they create in different valuable ways. And so, no, you don't have to be crazy to be creative. And yes, we're all creative. That it's not just relegated to a gifted few.
Right. And that's the interesting thing to me. I think of it, and these are just kind of the I guess examples that come to mind. I think of like there's just this dichotomy of the brooding artist, and everything like that, the one that is, they go to dark places to draw out that inspiration. But I also think that it's possible to be the happy tinkerer type of, like, I guess it's kind of like Edgar Allan Poe versus like Geppetto or something like that. Like you've got, the workshop of working on, and he's just, he's just the old guy making puppets or something like that, I guess that's the key to it. But he enjoys his work, it seems like. But, no, all of that, yeah.
Yeah, well, let's stretch that out, analogy out just a bit.
Sure.
Let's stretch that out because I think you have a really good point there. And it's like the dichotomy is not necessarily the brooding artist, okay?
Yeah.
But there's also the joyous artist. There's also the people that are out there doing amazing things. And the other thing is that creativity keeps you young. And what we know about creativity is that your creative facilities do not diminish over age. What we find is that they increase over age. And there is this myth that, you've lost your creativity by the time you hit 40. Well, my most creative times have been in the last 4 or 5 years, and I'm in my 60s. And I've written more books, I've produced more videos, I've, done more media, because at this time of my life, I have the time, the resources, and I also have the connections of the people I can build on a team with. And there is such great joy in doing really good creative work that it's like, you just don't want to stop. And so I think that is becoming much more prevalent in the world. IBM has their new slogan called "Let's Create." Let's create. Are you kidding me? I mean, that's extraordinary, right? Because people didn't use that word "create" when it was associated with business, but now it's like, let's create. Now, it's not innovation. It's which is business safe. People like innovation, right? But the core of innovation is creativity. Creativity is the spark that ignites innovation.
Mm-hmm. What sort of students do you typically see? Are they often generalists that are interested in creativity to apply to separate different things? Is there a specific area that they often come looking to innovate? And of course, there's a whole lot of room that you can operate in between those sorts of poles. But what sort of I guess interests is it business and leadership? Yeah.
Yeah, Clayton, that's an excellent question. I really appreciate that question. because it's everybody, all right? Everybody from every walk of life. We have doctors, we have business people, we have teachers, we have scientists, we have people in government, we have people, you name an aspect of life, and I can probably tell you somebody that's gone through our program that's gotten a master's degree in creativity studies. Because what they've done is that they've taken these are the people, I guess the distinguishing factor is these people are usually very good at what they do, and they get to a point and they say, well, what else is there? What else can I make happen? And these are folks that are oftentimes looking for a next step, oftentimes a change. Our students tend to be older. Average age of our graduate student, I think, is in the mid-30s now, right? It's people that want to maybe take their career in a bigger direction, or want to try something entirely new. In my case, I mean, I began when I was very young, but I didn't want to teach guitar anymore. I wanted to do this creativity stuff. So it is absolutely, I mean, machinery manufacturing, everything, engineers, we got them all. Okay, every aspect of life, I can safely say now, has gotten involved in our program in any way, in to learn creative process, because they see that they want to do something different. They want to add something. They want to create a different career. And I honestly can't think of furniture makers. I'm looking around my room here. I'm trying to find something, that we don't have in the program. I mean, communication people, physicists. We have a couple of physicists out of Europe that have taken classes with us. That their master's degree. Every walk of life now has been through this. Yeah,
that's great. That's great. I'd be interested. We were talking about those myths and everything, and people, and that process of learning about creativity. I'd be interested to see what part of the process or part of the techniques maybe are the ones that maybe the real light bulb moment to people. Because for me, I think one of the biggest things that have influenced me as I began learning about creativity has been suspending judgment, about deferring that evaluation till the end. That one for me has been that really has clicked, and I think that has been one of the things that as we talk about the craziness of of the creative, maybe that's the thing, is the crazy ones are those that just don't judge their work based on what the social pressure or that inner self-critic is telling them. Anyway, I think that that sort of thing has influenced me. What sort of parts of, I guess, the process have typically seemed to be the biggest impact, maybe?
Yeah, I think you've got three things there. First, the idea of not judging while you're generating. And when you do that, the quantity and the quality of your ideas increases significantly. I mean, major significantly. We have research from this for over the years, and some of my research has been involved in that as well, is when you compare groups that are trained in creativity techniques, groups that are not trained, and we actually we videotaped them. They created better ideas, they created more ideas, they laughed more, they smiled more, they got more involved. So there was also a group functioning there as well, because it changes the group dynamics. So not just individually, but also as a group as well. So the idea of not judging while generating, that is really a cornerstone. And there's two more, I think, as you asked that question. One is the idea of connection making. And oftentimes people, really the essence of creativity is connecting things that aren't usually considered related. Some examples that we use are like, what's the connection between waffles and shoes? Well, the connection between that is the Nike waffle trainer was inspired by Bill Bowerman's wife making waffles. He'd be working because he wanted to find a new way for his sneakers to grip AstroTurf. The pacemaker was inspired by two things: first, a mistake, and also hazard traffic signal flashers. Okay. Let's see a few other things here. Velcro was inspired by looking at cockleburrs. All right. Let's see. There's a whole bunch of other. Let me give it another. And it's extraordinary. A couple of those are coming to mind, but I'll give them to you in just a second. But the idea of making connections between areas that are not usually connected, that's where the breakthroughs come through. So designs for buildings and air conditioning has come from looking at how prairie dogs make their holes. And remember, that the design for learning how to fly came from birds. So, so we make connections with things that are not generally related, all right? And that's one thing, and that's, you can consciously do that. And so if you're working on a problem, go to something that's not related at all, like I'm looking over here is my clock. What ideas do I get from my clock for solving this? Or what ideas do I get from this, from these set of speakers for solving that? Making those connections. So it's not judging, it's making connections. And here's the big one. I guess this is a pretty big one. And this is really figuring out what the real problem is. And this is where my work has been centered now for about the last year and really moving forward on this, because there's a lot of creativity in figuring out what the real problem is. And we are very, very bad at trying to figure out what the real problem is because we haven't been taught to find problems. We've been taught to find answers to problems that have been presented to us. 2 + 2 is 4. You know, what's the capital of Spain? Madrid. Okay, that's you know, we've been taught that, and we're still using the methods, the strategies that we used in 5th grade to solve problems. Now, in this very complex world, we haven't been taught to identify what the real problem is. And that's where extraordinary creativity comes involved. I was working with a large medical system here on Monday, and all we did was teach them how to figure out what the real problem was. And the comment that they made was, gee, this is not the way we do business. And gee, if we did business this way, we'd make a lot more money, we'd save a lot more money, we'd save a lot more lives. So there you go. It's that non-judgment, making connections, and then what you really wouldn't think about creativity, but is really coming up with what the real problem is. What is the creative question we need to solve?
How do you think about the relationship between curiosity and creativity when it comes to looking around you and how those connections, I guess, get made in the end?
Absolutely connected. And I'd say curiosity is the front end of the creative process. You have to be curious about something, you know. We talk about people that are curious about what the problem is. And the word we use from that is constructive discontent. Constructive discontent. In other words, you sense a problem and you want to try and do something about it, all right? Or you're curious about something. Curiosity really is a good basis for discovery, but it's also the basis for creativity as well. So curiosity, I would say, is the front end, the front part of it. And once you become curious about something, then you begin to apply some creative thinking about it. Okay, I'm curious about this. Now, what gaps am I seeing here? Okay, what angles might we want to solve here? What's new around here that we need to work on? And that's where the creativity comes in. So intimately related. Curiosity, imagination, all part of creativity.
For sure, for sure. And of course, I write a newsletter called Laterally, and of course, you know, thinking associate that as kind of being there working as an axis of sorts between those two, particularly because when it comes to the lateral thinking, of reorienting your thinking, reframing it, where does lateral thinking come into play in the creative process?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you take a look at what Edward de Bono's work was, the idea was that you're moving down a track here, okay? And to be able to solve the problem, you can't stay on the same track. You have to make a lateral move. He uses the example of, you know, it's a matter of digging the hole deeper or digging a different hole, all right? And it totally relates. One, forced connections or making connections is a tool for lateral thinking, because you're moving along this path here, a new insight comes in and you start to move in that way. Redefining what the real problem is a tool for lateral thinking, because here's what we think the problem is. When we take a look at all the problems that are out there, all the challenges that are associated with this, oftentimes this isn't it at all, and something over here is what the real issue is. So those are some tools to help you to actualize lateral thinking. So there, it's right in there. It's right related. So yeah,
for sure, absolutely. As people begin to learn about creativity, what sort of layout does that have as far as, you know, whether it's a curricular layout or something like that? What does that process look like as far as getting their feet wet and then getting them, I guess, swimming along with the creative studies?
Well, I think the first thing you need to do is read my book, Create in a Flash. So, well, you know, I would think there's a lot of good literature out there, and I want to talk a little bit about Create in a Flash. When we did Create in a Flash, what I did on that is I put 40 plus years of research into that, of the stuff that works consistently. And then what I also did was I hired an art director and an editor. And when you look at the book, it's a beautiful piece of work because we use pictures and illustrations, and it's really well written. And my whole focus has been to keep it simple. So focus on a few creativity methods that you can use consistently, and then use them consistently. So, and that was really the purpose of that book out there. And I really think it fills a distinctive position out in the marketplace. So that's one way to start. The other thing is that there's tremendous amount of resources out there. But what I would also say is that as folks are looking at this stuff, make sure that the people that you're studying have got a track record of some research, of some success around it. Because there's lots of folks out there, as in any field that takes off, is like, somebody read a book or two, and all of a sudden they've labeled themselves as a creativity consultant. Or one of the things that makes me absolutely crazy is people self-labeling themselves as thought leaders. I'm a thought leader for creativity. Oh, my heavens. So I've told my students, I said, if I ever see you labeled anywhere, like on LinkedIn or something, as a thought leader for creativity, I will find you, I will track you down, and I will kick you in the bottom. Because you don't label yourself as that, okay? The world can label you as that, but you don't label yourself as that. So I would look for people that are doing good, serious work, that are having a lot of fun at what they're doing, and keep it simple. Keep it simple. I mean, the thing that I find is that there's about 4 or 5 creativity techniques that work consistently, time after time after time, and if people can get those down, they're great. I mean, if you want to study more about creativity, there's lots of techniques that are out there, and they work and they're valuable, but you don't need all the tools in the toolbox all the time to build a good house. So start simple, buy Create in a Flash. And then just start experimenting with it. Yeah.
Yeah. Link will be in the description. Yeah. And well, yeah, sure. And will you tell us more about the book? I think that would be a great thing to dig into. And when we read that title, is it talking about having such a familiarity with creativity that it comes easier after a while? What do we think of as far as that?
That's a really good question. The title of the book is Create in a Flash, A Leader's Recipe for Breakthrough Innovation. There's 2 things there, the flash and the recipe. First off, people often think that creativity has to be laborious, that you have to struggle, the brooding artist to get an insight. Not true. I mean, creativity is easy. It flows. Sometimes the ideas just come to you almost naturally, so you just write them down, okay? The other one is the recipe aspect for it. And there's a recipe for creativity. So we use Create in a Flash sort of like you'd use a cookbook, okay? So here's the recipe for coming up with ideas. Here's the recipe for defining problems better. And we divide the book basically in 4 parts. First, how to figure out what the real problem is. We give lots of examples of that from industry, from medicine, from all over the place. How to generate ideas, how to evaluate those ideas, and then how to put those ideas into action. And we were fortunate to interview folks from all walks of life and gotten stories from them on how they're able to apply this stuff in their life. And it's also, the book is designed that you can skip around in it. If you want to read a section here or flip back and forth, it's relatively independent. The work I'm working on right now isn't quite as independent as this. But it's designed to move around. When you need a little inspiration, you flip it open. And we also have stories about, how people, basically how folks can get ideas just naturally by talking to different people, by getting time away. But as you mentioned, Clayton, one of the stories in there is get creative, drive a tractor. And I talk about, going on the farm where I'm creative because the ideas are coming to you there. So it's basically, the premise of the book is you don't have to labor. That's the flash part of it. And 2, that there's a recipe for creativity. And those both push against myths that are out there as far as, I have to have labor, I have to be struggling over this. Okay. And 2, that there's no real process for creativity. Well, there certainly is a process for creativity. And we validated that for years and years and years. So that's the basic behind it. So thank you for asking. Yeah.
Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think one of the interesting parts of it that I have been thinking more about lately has been the kind of certain times where you would defer to basically let let the ideas stew on the back burner until something comes up, something. So I think that, and I, every time I say his name, I want to take a moment to make sure that I get it right. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's formulation of the creative process during the point. I have to make sure I have that right. But basically, you have that the stage. I believe it's about 3 or 4 steps in where you kind of take a step back. You let it kind of percolate in the background. Do we often think of there being times where this is an instance where we need to take a hands-on approach to formulating a bunch of specific solutions and sifting through them? And do we think of there being specific times where we research, we garner all this information, and then we just basically let the soup cook up and everything? Is there a difference in which kind of approach we would need to take, or are they the same process?
Well, I'd say it's a yes and so Mihai Csikszentmihalyi was a wonderful, wonderful person. I have friends that have studied with him and worked with him, and he passed away just a couple of years ago. Just a wonderful, wonderful, kind, generous man. So all the good stuff to Mihai. I got interested in his work when he was working about the whole concept of flow back in probably I want to say the 70s. But to his point, there's this is sort of like the deliberate creativity and the creativity that's based on incubation. And so the deliberate creativity, we've talked about that, where you don't judge, you get all those ideas out, you evaluate them later. The other process is based on a real classic process of creativity, which was illustrated by Graham Wallace back in 1926, when he talked about the 4 parts of the creative process: preparation, incubation, illumination, and verification. So preparation, as you talked about, Clayton, is where you get all this stuff going on. It's where you get saturated in this, and then you let it sit. And maybe you've tried to solve the problem and it's not solved yet, and then you kind of wait for it, hoping your subconscious works on it or gets a cue, like making a connection, and bang, the idea comes to you. You verify it, and then you put it into action. Well, the way I work with this stuff is that when I work with groups, we do the deliberate creativity stuff. We get up there generating those ideas like crazy, and let's go. And then I consciously, we take a break, and we'll say, okay, here's the deal. What's going to happen is you've got some stuff stirred up here in your brain, all right? So be ready to jot those ideas down when they come to you, because they're going to happen when you're falling asleep, when you're taking a shower, when you're driving, something like that, when you're relaxed about something, because your brain is continuing to work on it. So write those ideas down and then bring them back. My experience around that has been, in the whole process of writing, because I'll be working on something, and I'm sure you've experienced this too as a writer. You'll be working on something, you get to a point and the sentence isn't working, it's just not cooking, it's like, stop, and then you step away from it, and you get a cup of coffee, or you go to the restroom or whatever, and bango, there it is, it comes to you, and you have to rush back in to get it into the computer. So I use that process a lot, and also when I'm writing too, as you have experienced, you don't write a book from beginning to end. You write it in sections. You write where the energy is. Mm-hmm. Hey, I've got energy to write this now. I don't have energy to write this, so don't even bother going there. Sometimes the best thing you can do when you're working on doing creative work is to push your stuff back away from your work and take a break. Go out into nature, take a nap. Naps are great for creativity. I can't tell you the number of times that after I take an afternoon nap, I come up with new ideas. It's fantastic. And so it's a yes and. It's, there's deliberate aspects of it, and then there's that aspect of it where, we'll just kind of let it sit, and I have confidence, because it's happened hundreds of times, that I'll get a new insight and a new breakthrough. So it's both. Yeah, it's wonderful. That's what's so extraordinary about being the human brain, the whole concept of creativity. You can drop a problem into your brain and let it cook for a day or two, and all of a sudden, bango, there's a solution. So, yes.
Absolutely. And, you were, a few moments ago, we were talking about some of those stories of where ideas come from, like waffles and shoes and so on. And
right.
With the newsletter, I find myself often writing about different things, his history and the like, and I think that, well, that's where the stories are, so that's where the great storytelling comes from. But do you find that looking back helps to teach the creative process or to provide insight as far as consulting goes to the creative process? Because looking back at those different examples where the solution was not clear, but and maybe it's not even clear. Maybe people still wouldn't think of, this idea came from this area and then got applied here, and it's not obvious. You have to dissect, look into the history of it. Is that something that is valuable, you think, as far as helping to teach creativity?
Well, all information is valuable, and so the only information we have is information from history, whether it's now or whether it's a second ago when I said now, okay? That information has come out there. There's tremendous amounts of information we have available. So when we're working on something, get as much information as you can, but there's two schools of thought on that. One, when we're working on a challenge, one school of thought is if you torture the data long enough, it will confess. The other school of thought is just a little bit of data is all you need to get going, because what you're going to do is you're going to be doing approximate thinking. So, yes, data is valuable, and once again, Sid Barnes, my teacher, I was talking about, that we combine old ideas to create new ideas. And so, and I would just say that we probably even go beyond that. We create new ideas to create newer ideas. But yeah, anytime you can get further information on something, that's great. However, the key is to not let the information stifle you. Not to be so overwhelmed with it that you see all the reasons why something won't work. Use the information to help you. And the other thing is, too, is information is not just data, it's not just facts, it's feelings, it's intuition, it's senses about something, it's an aspiration. That's all important data as well. So you put that all in the pot, yeah.
For sure. All right. What are some of the resources you would point folks to? I know you've got several out that folks can check out. What sort of resources, books or pieces of media that would be good for folks to check out?
Well, Create in a Flash is great. Also, we've just produced a 9-part series on innovation on the Open Sesame e-learning platform. So if you go to Open Sesame, you can preview those. And they're wonderful for meetings, for those sorts of things. The other thing is that I'm looking at my bookcase over here. There's where do I want to go with this? The classics, Applied Imagination. It's quite dated, but boy, it's a real classic. I'm looking over here. What are some of my other favorites here? There's a couple books. One called Uncommon Genius, which was a story about the MacArthur Awards that was written quite some time ago. I like those, and I would say, and so it's a wonderful book out by Stuart Firestein, not related, called Ignorance, and he talks about how important it is to ask questions. And I guess kind of where my reading has been lately is more along the lines of, kind of breaking it open around there, asking questions, those sorts of things. But, and not to be big on self-promoting, but the reason why we did Create in a Flash was to answer that very question. Where do you go to get started? And we've been real pleased with it as far as that's concerned. And I have another little book called Why Didn't I Think of That, which is a little creativity fable. People have loved that, and it's in its 7th printing now.
Oh, wow.
So I would recommend things like that. And that's kind of what's coming to mind right now. And if we use Create in a Flash with our introductory programs because people find it, they really like it, and it works, and it gives you good directions to go, and there's videos that go along with it. So, yeah. Absolutely. And hey, no, self-promotion, absolutely, all the time. I completely get it. I'm a big fan. If I got to do it, I got to cheer everybody else on to do it as well. That's darn right. Yeah.
We've all.
Well, the thing is, yeah. I mean, I poured my heart into that book. It was like I gave it everything I had. It's really funny because we talk about the next book, which is called Solve the Real Problem, and that's due out first part of next year. But when I did Create in a Flash, I thought I was done. I mean, I gave it. We pulled out all the stops. So I really got to say, I think it's one of the best books out there on creativity, based on the experience and then based on just the usability of it, because it's just fun to read. And I think a book should be a work of art.
Yeah.
And so the next book that's coming out is going to be another work of art. So
That's good.
I have a wonderful illustrator, Cassandra Ott, great editor, Heather Lazekas. So I got great folks to work with.
For sure. I kind of curious because I'm thinking about the process of researching creativity. What are some of the mysteries that still remain about creativity? What sort of things don't we know?
Well, I think this is something that we don't know about thinking altogether, not just creative thoughts, but thoughts. I mean, we still don't know how you make a thought. You know, we don't know how we do that. You know, and I have good friends that are neuroscientists and stuff like that. I mean, there's all these chemicals and stuff. They're sitting around up there firing and do that, all that stuff, but we really don't know how that happens. You know.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
I would say, you know, when we're taking a look at the mysteries, it's the mysteries of the human brain. It's the mysteries of how, you know, we make sense out of things, and making sense out of things is creating. But, you know, how this 3-pound hunk of meat up here, you know, creates consciousness, creates ideas, creates meaning, creates emotions. Still don't quite know how that electrical soup works up there. So I would say that's probably the frontiers of where we're going next. Yeah,
for sure. And that's one of the most interesting things to me often is to have creativity. We talk about history. The history of ideas is a really interesting one to me. And I was recently writing about this concept of the 5 wits that was more Elizabethan era. You know, it's a historical idea of, you know, kind of like how you have 5 senses, you have 5 wits, and basically the ways in which different people in different areas of the past thought about things help you to kind of reconfigure and pivot your kind of thinking to make you help see things differently. And so how they thought about thinking was, you know, just wit in general sense and the like, and things like imagination as specifically taking the image of something and being able to recall it, and then, you know, things like memory, and, you know, so they're interesting
image.
Yeah, they're interesting ways that these have evolved, and I think just getting brushed up on some of those evolutions in thought really, I guess, help you to change your way of thinking.
And I guess too, what I would say is that, you know, as far as creativity is concerned, study the classics. You know, study the stuff that, you know, oftentimes what happens in this business, and my colleagues and I have talked about, is that somebody comes up with a new technique, they think, which is just a relabel of some of the work that we've done. I've had so much of my work, particularly around the areas of ideation, evaluating ideas, show up in many different forms. It's like, hey, you know, that really is this technique, and so there's a lot of relabeling and claiming going on in the service of becoming thought leaders. So,
and
don't call yourself a thought leader, Clayton. I'll find you.
I won't. You'll find me and drag me to Buffalo State to get my degree. Yeah.
There you go, buddy. Yeah, at least get that first. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think that also that's one of the interesting things of studying different influences. You see, say, the way that the Odyssey has been adapted over the years, whether it's turned into Ulysses by James Joyce, or it's been turned into Oh Brother Where Art Thou by the Coen brothers. You know, so I don't know, those sorts of ways in which you can study somebody making those sorts of changes to this thing that they didn't originally produce, but they've reinterpreted and reconfigured and things like that is really
they've built on it. They've added to it. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And that's really creativity as well. It's building on it, refining something, making it better, making it smoother, reconfiguring it. That's creativity too. Yeah.
For sure. All right. Anything else you want to add before we wrap up today?
No, this is just a lot of fun, so enjoy. Great to see it. You know, let me know when it's posted. Love to see it, and you're welcome to slice and dice this up and And boy, it was just nice to meet you and have this conversation. So
Absolutely.
yeah,
Roger Firestein, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
my pleasure, Clayton. My pleasure.
All right. I'm going to stop the recording. We'll wait a second. I think it needs